So today I'll be continuing with my scheduled discussion and point spread prediction videos. Today I'll be doing Minnesota. Minnesota has usually been a solid team in the Big Ten. Never a great team and not a good program in football, but they usually at least get 6 wins. And last season was a little bit of a disappointment for them. They only went 5-7, and they actually still got invited to a bowl game, and they did win that, so they finished 6-7. But mm, mm, their offense was terrible last year. They only averaged around 20 points per game, and I'll be honest, I barely ever watched Minnesota football, but I do know the kind of football that they like to play. They never have a good quarterback. They had terrible quarterbacks last year. Really, that Big Ten West division that they played in had the worst group of quarterbacks in the country last year. I think they were just terrible. Mm, and they just want to run the football a whole bunch and try to use up clock by keeping other teams' offenses on the field so they can uh, keep their defense from getting tired and hold their opponent down to a low score. But that didn't work last year. They were okay at running the ball, but they weren't great, and their defense was not good either. It was, mm, I think, below average by a little bit. Uh, and so on this schedule, they start the season on a Thursday at home against North Carolina. So I think Minnesota may be getting North Carolina at a good time because of not only North Carolina is losing Drake May, who was a really good quarterback, but they only have a, a few players that I think coming back from last year's team uh, with the starters. Uh, they don't have that much production coming back. So, with it being at the beginning of the season and a home game for Minnesota, I would like their chances to get the win in this one. Mm, and then they play Rhode Island and Nevada, which those should be two for sure wins for them. Nevada will probably be tougher than Rhode Island is going to be, but Minnesota should win both of those pretty big. And then they start their conference schedule at home against Iowa. So Minnesota's best win last year was against Iowa, and that actually wasn't that good, really, because I know Iowa won 10 games, but you know how awful Iowa's offense was. They weren't really one of the good teams, mm, and I think Minnesota has a good chance to beat them again. The final score to that game last year was, I think, 12-10. Uh, mm, so Iowa's offense, I think, was still going to be like that. And if they are Minnesota offense shouldn't have to do much again to beat them. But Iowa's defense, I think, is going to be mm, a problem for anybody, especially a team like Minnesota, whose offense I don't think is going to be that good, especially uh, not at throwing the football. And then next on the road at Michigan, there's really no chance here for Minnesota. Michigan's offense may be pretty bad actually, uh, but their defense is still a lot better than Minnesota's is going to be. And Michigan's offense is probably still uh, a little bit better, at least, than Minnesota's is. So I don't really see this one being that close. And then they play USC at home. So I've been seeing that USC 's offense probably won't be as good this year because they're losing Caleb Williams. But I actually think they may score more points this year than last year. Not because Caleb Williams is leaving. Caleb Williams has, in my opinion, been the best quarterback in college football these past 2 seasons. But I think USC will probably have better quarterback protection this year, and I think they'll probably be able to run the ball a little easier. So I just don't think Minnesota's offense can keep up with USC's. So I don't think they have that much of a chance to win that one. I probably won't be picking Minnesota in that game when I do predictions. And then UCLA on the road. This is more winnable. Uh, it's going to be tough, uh, but UCLA is a lot different of a team this year than they were last year. Uh, and then this first week off comes at a good time because it comes after a game against UCLA that's going to be tough, even though they may win. And then before a home game against Maryland that's going to be very winnable also. Maryland loses that quarterback this year who is Tua Tagovailoa's uh, younger brother, and he was really the only reason why Maryland was even an average team these past couple of seasons. So I don't really expect much from Maryland this year. They don't have anybody really good to replace him, I don't think. And then on the road at Illinois, this is one that it would have been better to have at home uh, because Minnesota and Illinois are pretty close. I think Minnesota, I think, maybe a little better, but uh, I know I talk a lot about home field advantage on this channel, but it really does matter a lot where a game is played. It can really make a difference because if you look at a bunch of games between teams like Minnesota and Illinois that are pretty evenly matched uh, from the past of really any year, uh, you will see that a whole lot more than not, the home team won the game. And then on the road at Rutgers, so 2 road games in a row. That's not really good. Now they could beat Rutgers just as much as they could beat Illinois, uh, but Rutgers, I don't think is going to be much worse than Minnesota. Uh, and then they take a week off before playing Penn State. Now, I don't think this is going to do them any good because Penn State has so much more talent than Minnesota does. And I think they're a much better coach team. Uh, Now, I did say that Disaster Aller is still looking like a disaster for Penn State at quarterback because he looked terrible in the spring game, like he looked all season pretty much of last year. But even if he is a disaster, Minnesota is going to be just as much, if not more, of a disaster at quarterback. And nowhere near as good as Penn State on any other part of the team. And then they play Wisconsin on the road. That's one they might be able to pull off, but I think it's probably unlikely. Wisconsin, I think, is better. And uh, so now I'll move on to the point spread prediction. So, if you want to see more about how I do these point spreads, you can watch my first video of these Ohio State. I explain it all in that video, but games in the green are games where I think Minnesota will be a blowout favorite, which is 20 or more points. And there's one of those, Rhode Island. And then games in the blue are games where I think Minnesota will be favored to win by double digits, 10 to 19 points. And there's one of those, Nevada. Mm, Games in the pink are games where I think Minnesota will be favored to win by about a field goal, 1 to 5 points. And there's two of those, uh, Maryland and Rutgers. And games in the black are toss-up games, which means that there won't be a favorite. At least right now, there would not be a clear favorite, but there could be a favorite when it comes time. And there's one of those, Iowa. Mm, And games in the gray are games where I think Minnesota will be about a field goal underdog, so 1 to 5 points. And there's three of those: North Carolina, UCLA, and Illinois. Mm, and games in the yellow are games where I think Minnesota will be an underdog by about a touchdown, so 6 to 9 points. And there's uh, mm, two of those, USC and Wisconsin. And games in orange are games where I think Minnesota will be a double-digit underdog, but not a blowout underdog, so 10 to 19 points. And there's two of those, Michigan and Penn State. Rhode Island, the spread in that one should be 30 points at least. Nevada, that's close to the green, but I put it in the blue because Minnesota is not a great team in the Power Four, and Nevada is in the Mountain West Conference, which isn't horrible. Uh, but I think Minnesota should be favored by three scores, 17 to 19 points. But probably not quite 20, but possibly. Uh, and Iowa, I don't just have that as a toss up because it's a home game, but uh, also because Minnesota did beat them last year. But I do think Iowa overall is a better team than Minnesota. Um, and UCLA, that's in the gray because it's a road game. I think they may be favored by a point or two over Minnesota, and then Illinois, it's the same way. I think Illinois may be favored by about a point in that game, but Minnesota would be the favorite, I think, in both of those if they were home games for them. Mm, and mm, Maryland. That's in the pink because it's a home game for Minnesota. I think they may be about a point favorite in that one. And then Rutgers, I think Minnesota may be favored by about three in that game. But they would for sure be an underdog to Maryland if it was on the road, and Rutgers possibly, or it might be a toss-up if that was the case. Mm, and USC, I think the spread will be about 6 points in that game. And then Wisconsin, I think the spread in that one will be around 6. That would be in the gray if it was a home game. And Michigan and Penn State, I think mm, they'll be favored to beat Minnesota by around 14 points. Mm, and North Carolina, that one's tough. I think North Carolina will probably still be favored by about a point in that game, even on the road, but wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota was favored. So I think Minnesota will be favored in 4 games, and uh, they'll have a game that they might be favored in. Iowa. Mm, So maybe five, but that means that they will have to pull at least one upset to get to a bowl game. And I actually think there's a good chance they could do that. There's a good chance that when I do my final predictions, I'll have Minnesota at 6 wins. And of course, I know they did make a bowl game with 5 wins last year, but it's going to be unlikely for them to get invited to one again at only 5 wins. But good news about this is they do avoid Ohio State and Oregon. Uh, and that will be it with this video. And please subscribe and thanks for watching. And also, thank you to the uh, newest subscriber that I got, subscriber number 8. I really appreciate it.